Okay, so all those hundreds of years ago, Shakespeare said, "There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so." Meaning that it's our interpretation of the event. It's not the event itself. So it's how we perceive the event that influences our thoughts, our feelings, our emotion, our behavior, our physiology. So it's not the event itself. So for example, 3 people could go for a job interview and not get the job, and their perception of the event can be entirely different. 3 people could break up a relationship, 3 people, or 100 people for that matter, doesn't matter how many people do. The point being is that it's our perception of the situation, our mindset has a big impact. Our thoughts impact our feelings impact our behavior and physiology. So one has a knock-on effect with the other. So Shakespeare said that all those years ago, so he got there before us. As people often do, our own thoughts make something good or bad. And that was in in Hamlet. But even before that, I'm just going to close that door. I can hear some background noise there. Even before Shakespeare, you had Greek philosophers who shared a similar view. Epictetus, who the view, not the event, it's our interpretation of the event that is the critical factor. That's not undermining an issue. That's not undermining saying we shouldn't be disappointed. We should be jumping for joy if we have bad news. That's not implying that you lose a job, you break up, or something goes horribly wrong. We jump for joy. But what it does imply for me is that what can we control in life? We can control some things, we can't control some things. But one thing we can control is our thoughts to a point. And I think for me, having the ability to be more consciously aware, because too often we get stuck in certain situations where we can't control it, but we get stuck in that situation, and that sort of the rumination that the thoughts go over and over, and rather than see other opportunities, we get stuck in that situation. Someone could lose a job and they could be stewing over that job they've lost, and other jobs come up and they don't take them. They break up a relationship and other opportunities come up and they're so focused on the last one. And the key thing for me is not undermining, but finding a way to go forward and move forward in life.
Well, why do people get stuck in those situations? Why do they experience paralysis?
That's a good question, really, and I think it's an individual thing, and 2 people can experience the same thing and see it completely differently. So, two people could lose a job, and the interpretation, all things being equal, lose a job, maybe someone who's got millions of pounds in the bank might feel different about it, but all things being equal, 2 people can have the same experience, but they have a whole different perception of reality. I suppose that comes down to maybe biology, psychology, sociology. There's not one thing. It could be genetic, it could be the environment, it could be the experiences in life, it could be the way they were brought up. And it's like a melting pot, yeah.
And it could also be what you're trying to explain to us, whoever's got a more clearer relationship with their mind, with their brain, in order to control a little bit more how they perceive.
Yeah, I mean, people can work on themselves, and for sure, and people can develop themselves, people can get better, and it's not what happens to you, how you react that matters. Things are going to happen to all of us, whether we like it or not. That's a given. All of us are going to experience setbacks in life, and the head doesn't understand, and it can be difficult to bridge the head from the heart. Meaning that you've got a part of the mind that, and we've seen in research that when you combine cognitive therapy with hypnosis, it's more effective in the sense that you look at the mind and you have the so-called conscious mind, and consciously we know right from wrong. We know what to eat. We know what's good for us. So consciously we have an idea, but unconsciously we'll always win. So for example, we try and solve issues on a conscious level. Behavior and emotion predominantly at an unconscious level. So at the moment your heart is beating, you're not telling your heart to beat. You're breathing, you're not telling yourself to breathe. It's all happening automatically. Behavior and emotion is pretty much an unconscious process too, to a point. So you can didactically try and solve issues and sort of rationalize, but you only get so far. I think what's really important is that we can go deeper and we'll look at ways to access flow, that flow state, ways to get into that flow state, get in that zone and go forward, which is key. One thing I want to say is that today, obviously, I don't know where anybody is, and the general disclaimer that it's an educational seminar, so I'm not here to treat anybody, but you take away what is right for you, you know, and that's the sort of key. So if I'm working with someone, generally I'll do like a treatment plan for that individual. When I'm doing seminars, I generally say to people, okay, it's purely educational. I'm not recommending that they use anything that I cover today. And if they are getting treatment, then speak to the person they're getting treatment from before they deploy anything and go from there. But the aim of any therapy is pretty straightforward. It's to identify maladaptive responses and replace with more adaptive ones. Any treatment there's a good chance that you'll learn that, but that sort of extends to many things. Okay, so a child can see the parent, and there's a good chance that they may observe that and learn. If problems were located in the prefrontal cortex, then you could have a manual. You could generally get a manual and solve every issue. So, okay, for me, well, one thing I've done over the years is create experiences for people, tasks, rather than just sit down and, because you can have a manual for every problem. If the problems were in the prefrontal cortex, then you could have a manual and solve every issue. It'd be as easy as that. But what happens, they get lodged deep in the limbic system, and some issues are phylogenic. We inherit from our animal cousins and so on and so forth, and the brain, as it's evolved over time, is where it is, and some things are a lot more deeper. So we give people experiences that can be quite useful, and that experience, so what I mean by that could be, okay, one way of framing is, okay, let's think of a teenager. The teenager starts to smoke. The reason why the teenager starts to smoke, the driving force is that the teenager sees the uncle smoke. So the idea is the teenager sees the uncle smoke who he considers to be cool. That's the idea. The association is cool. The uncle drives a sports car and he's smoking a cigarette, and then that links to behavior. So the teenager decides that smoking is cool behavior. Now, you could tell the teenager the error of his or her ways, didactically. Do not smoke, it's no good for you. There's a very good chance the teenager is going to sort of think, well, you know, he's not going to say, thanks, you know, mum or dad, for the error of my ways. They're probably going to carry on doing it. From a task perspective, what you could do, and that's not advising anyone to do this, it's just giving you an example. I was working in professional football. There was a young lad who, he was a troublesome teenager. He'd sort of got into a lot of trouble, and he wasn't bad in the sense that he had his ways about him, but he was very talented. And really, really talented. It's always the way, isn't it? And I took him one time, and no one was getting through to him. And I took him one time. He was quite a materialistic young man too. And I took him one time to like a car dealer to see sports cars. And I said, one day, take a sit in the car and feel it, smell it, taste it. I said, if you can sort your ideas out and sort your mind out, there's a very good chance one day you're going to own one of those and you're going to have that life that you see. You got the talent, we all know that. No club wanted him anymore because he was too much trouble, so they said. And we were the last chance. And I said, well, we are pretty much the last chance for you. So if you want that, you've got the talent to have that. And ironically, years later, he plays for the big clubs and all sorts of stuff. One time, he saw me and he just shouted my name, and we had a bit of a joke about trillions of cells. If you think you're going to affect someone through what you say, you've got to think again, because there's trillions of cells in there, 86 billion neurons. So we've got to find a way to facilitate. And some people sometimes, it's about them wanting to help themselves too. Because if there's a swimming pool over there and someone's drowning and I can't swim, if I dive in, what will happen, do you think? Yeah, precisely. Someone dives in who can't swim, but I can give them a stick and say, can you take that? Do you think they'll take it? Well, it's their call, in the end. I can motivate them, find a way to motivate them to take it if I understand their values, their drivers, but ultimately it's their call. What we do have is a survival instinct. Okay, we prime to survive. We're biologically wired to survive with the survival instinct. And all those years ago, what would happen, we sort of explored different territories. Okay, so when you went to a new place, the first thing you did when you got back was tell your tribe what you saw. Any dangers? Did you see any dangerous animals? Did you see any dangerous tribes? So human beings are storytellers. We're storytelling creatures. We're not telling stories about others, we tell stories about ourselves. And we've inherited this negativity bias for survival. So if I went to a different town, because we've got that wide negativity bias. So what I'm trying to say is the brain is to keep you alive. The brain's not there to keep you happy. Happiness is just a word. Words are labels. It's the way we express how we think and feel, our map of reality. Okay, happiness to one person is different to another person, and so on and so forth. So ultimately, the brain is there for your survival. Okay, whilst we don't have those dangers anymore roaming the earth, we're still primed to assess danger, and that can be a problem. And the reason being is that if we operate in a fear response mode, we debilitate parts of the brain. So what happens is, and I'll touch on it later, we become less functional. The brain, the prefrontal brain, and he or she goes to type a point in her or his career that they had no ability in that technique. And you see him sort of freeze. That looked like a 5-year-old taking that penalty. And that was in life, in presentations, in business, in meetings. We get what we call, I think it was the author called Dan Goldman, I think it was, he said, it might have been him, I can't remember who it was now, but he said emotional hijack. We get hijacked emotionally. And we just get debilitated. That happens in sport and business. So getting into that flow state for me is key. Now, one of the things that really influenced my work over many years is hypnosis. And hypnotic phenomena has what we call dissociation and association as a component in hypnosis. And what we mean by that is what we associate to and what we dissociate from is a key element to hypnosis. Let me give you a quick example. Many years ago I was doing a show, BBC Radio Manchester. This woman wanted to reduce in weight. She was in her 60s. And one of her goals was to reduce weight. Another goal was to go swimming again. Okay, and she felt she could go swimming again. She could ultimately be more social, see her friends, and so on and so forth. But the issue was that she had a bad experience in the swimming pool at 8 years of age, and she sort of shut down. So whenever she thought about swimming, she'd associate to that experience. So she was associated to the experience and would disassociate in a more resourceful state. So one of the things I did technically was to get to reassociate swimming to all the positive things. Seeing her friends, being able to go away on holiday and be by a pool. So get to reassociate and disconnect from that anxiety. So rather than the anxiety piggybacking on the thought of swimming, dropping the anxiety and piggybacking the positive feelings of swimming and so on and so forth. And that goes for a lot of things. It's what we connect to, what we disconnect from. What I do in hypnosis is I get people to connect to a resourceful state. And in that resourceful state, we can extend their reality. Okay? So one of the things I do, because hypnosis has got a stigma about it, for a walk and be an absorption, or you can think of something that you're really good at doing. Absorption. So one time, this young lad I was working with, it was only 9 or 10 years of age, his mum brought him in to see me. He'd been to see other people before. He had some sleeping issues and bedwetting issues and wasn't really getting anywhere with anyone. And because he'd seen people before, he thought, I'm just another, one in the line. And I could see the resistance there. And what I did to him, I sort of, to break his state, I had like a felt tip, and I threw it at him to catch it. I wasn't expecting that. So I broke that state he was in, and I proceeded to say, can you write your best 11 of a certain football team? It so happened to be the football team was writing, we're in the premiership at that time, I'd worked with as well. So we had a common ground. And whilst he's writing the best 11, he's going into absorption. And then I'm sort of utilising that as a way to extend that reality. So whilst he's writing his best 11, and we're sort of debating which player should play where, and he's asserting control, I start talking about the sleeping issues he's got, and some of the bedwetting issues he's got. I start using a metaphor, the metaphor being the bladder like a ball. And he said, I played in goals one time. I said, did you win? He goes, 17-0. I said, why didn't you let them score? He goes, I don't have to let them score. I said, why not? And this is sort of giving him control back with the situation. I said, I think you should let them score a goal. He said, no, I shouldn't have had that. And I said, who controls the ball going in the net? He goes, I do. Okay, so who controls whether you sleep and whether you, eventually the bladder being the metaphor for the ball? And it sort of got him thinking, I actually control it. And his mum said to me a few weeks later, as I take him out to do experiential stuff too, she goes, it's all good and well, the work that you're doing is great, I'm enjoying it. He's actually won some awards in football. His dad's really happy, but I'm not bringing him here for football, I'm bringing him here for the issues I brought him in. I said, well, has he had any issues around the issues you brought him in with? She goes, no. She goes, but when are you going to hypnotise him? And the stigma of like the watch, and I said, well, we're going into trance, into a alpha state every time he's coming in. And ironically, she was probably dropping into a deeper state than he was without realising it. So I sort of want to dispel any myths around it. And sometimes you relive a past memory like it's happening now, and that's sort of a form of trance. Okay? So you relive a past memory. It could be a trauma, an accident, or situations happened in the past. Okay? You got bad food in fridge, you want to get rid of it before it contaminates the other food. And being the mind. True tight connection. That's one component of hypnosis that I think is quite useful to know. I mentioned before about the observational learning. I don't know if you've come across the Bandura Bobo doll experiment, observational learning. When I was writing a dissertation one time on observational learning, I came across this experiment and I wrote about it. And the moral of the story is that they got 3 groups of young children, cut a long story short, and they sort of showed parents behaving with dolls, okay? And the parents who, or adults, sorry, I should say, with dolls, and basically some would behave aggressive, some would behave non-aggressive, and some had no exposure. The children who were exposed to the aggressive model were more likely to act physically aggressive than the other children. So observational learning, Bandura's experiments in 1961. Okay, so we do learn through observation. Okay, we do learn through observation, which we'll touch on later on in the course, which is a significant factor. Now then, emotional shifts are the key. Being able to go through the gears and change state. So from the point of view, being human being, we have these experiences in life. So you could be on a plane and hit a bit of turbulence, and your whole reality of flying changes in a moment. Or you can be in an accident, traffic accident. You could have driven for 20 years and never had a problem, but one accident and you've got a perception that reality changes. The emotion you feel when you think about driving or flying or whatever can change in a moment as well. And you can tell someone it's safe to fly and you've driven before, but they're going to remember the danger that they've experienced. And think about it this way, films, for example. Why do we watch films for? And there's people out there that probably watch and things that are capable of eliciting alterations in mood and music. We talked about rock music before, so music can alter state, art, film, all these things can alter. And a different song, I was listening to the radio yesterday, I was driving into the city to do a seminar yesterday, and I heard a musician speak about how what the song meant to him. I was listening to an interview on the radio. This musician was saying this is what the song meant to him, but if it means something else to someone who listens to it, then so be it. It's whatever it means to them is okay. So art also can elicit different mood changes. We see a picture and we get a feeling inside. Movies are well known for that. So we can sort of somehow get access to the limbic system, which we'll touch on shortly. So, very briefly, what I want to say is that, and you can have, I'm going to give you a bit of jargon now, and I've got handouts I can email you if you want to, and you want to know more about the mind and that sort of stuff, but we'll link this to stuff we're going to cover today, the more technical stuff. So the thalamus gets information from all the senses, okay? So see, hear, feel, all the senses. The thalamus gets all the information from the senses. The thalamus then sends information to the amygdala. The amygdala there has been quite famous the last few years. Many people have been talking about the amygdala, the fight, flight, freeze. They say it's the size of an almond. It's not necessarily the size of an almond. It's got different structures, and it's not only a fear response. There's got other things that it does too, which I'll sort of touch on today. But notably, in the last few years, it's drawn attention to the fear response. But anyway, the thalamus sends information to the amygdala, okay? And the amygdala pre-screens for danger. So the amygdala, it gets information from the hippocampus. So the hippocampus has all these events stored. So the amygdala pre-screens that for danger, and the amygdala activates the hypothalamus to trigger a fear response in the body. Okay, so for example, you see the spider, you recall your parents' jump, and then you sort of get that response. Or you sort of on a plane, you've had a bad experience, or you have that part of the brain, we'd probably be in a lot of trouble because we'd probably be eaten alive by our animal cousins. But it deactivates the rational brain. And this is why people sometimes do things under pressure. So they get an email coming in, and the email insinuates loss or danger, or a text, and they reply like they would normally reply. So if someone had road rage, and someone cuts them up and they're like swearing at the other person while they have road rage, they're not thinking the person's probably racing their wife to hospital or something like that. You're not thinking logically. So when you take a penalty, you're not thinking, okay, it's 12 yards away, I do it in training every day. The rational brain gets deactivated, okay? And in business, it's really crucial because you sort of go to that flow state. The glands release active chemicals called hormones, and these are active molecules that create emotions and moods. Okay, which is key, which is important. We'll sort of touch on that later. And this sort of response, putting it in plain English, is happening around us and can be quite implicit, outside our conscious awareness and radar. We talk about the release of chemicals in the body. One time, the sports scientist at one of the biggest clubs in the world had asked me about cortisol in the bloodstream. The players will play the Champions League, and after the Champions League games on the weekday, on the weekend, he felt that they were affected by levels of cortisol in the bloodstream because they weren't sleeping well. And he said, what are some ways that you think could reduce cortisol? We've tried many things, but we're measuring it. And I said, well, what would be quite useful, I think personally, is perhaps you want to look at doing visualization rehearsal. Now, I'm not a medical person, but I do know that in hypnosis, we have the capacity to alter our temperature. We have the capacity to block out pain. Now, I'm not recommending to use hypnosis to block out pain because pain is a sign of something being wrong. Get medical treatment. But I do pain relief with people, and it works on distraction. absorption. Just like when you walk around a lake and you've got a pebble in the shoe, you don't notice it because you're so absorbed on the environment. When we play sport, they break a limb. So what I'm saying is that we can use the mind effectively to do that as well, for many things we touch on today too. So it helps you put together thinking and emotion to screen out what's not important and screening what's important. Okay, this region is involved in decision making and emotional regulation, as well as vital to regulation of physiological responses such as blood pressure and heart rate. Okay, so from the point of view of blood pressure and heart rate, you can't say to heart rate slow down. If I walk up a hill, what will happen to my heart rate, do you think? It's going to go up automatically because it's survival. I need to shunt more blood into my legs. Okay, my blood pressure, if I get bad news, is probably going to go up to protect me. Survival instinct. Okay, but I can't say blood pressure go down. So many years ago, when I was doing some training for the Air Force in the UK, one of the members of the staff, I talked about visualization rehearsal, had dismissed, wasn't dismissive, but was kind of been antagonistic about it. And rather than challenge him, I said, okay, let me do a demonstration. Because I thought if he had his way, he was a senior member, he would influence all the other staff members. And I said, okay, what we'll do, I'm going to take your heart rate and blood pressure prior to doing visualization, mental imagery, and I'm going to take it afterwards. And I'm not a medical person, but I know about sports performance and sports science. And I said, and I did 10 minutes of imagery, and his heart was about 80 beats per minute originally, and his blood pressure, I think, was slightly above the norm. And then after about 15, 20 minutes of imagery, he brought his heart rate down to about 60 beats per minute. And the blood pressure sort of stabilized. And I'm not advising people to use it for that. I did it to sort of prove a point to him how effective it was. And he said, okay, 20 beats per minute. If you multiply that by a day, that's 20,000 beats less stress on your heart. But more importantly for him, I said, if you've got to make a decision, a split decision, the higher your heart rate, the less effective the decision will be from a focus point of view. I said, okay, imagine running to the room and back again. And I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you're going to answer them. Then you're going to compose yourself, regulate your heart rate, and answer them then. See how much more focused you are. And he did me a favour by being the way he was, because then I could prove how powerful it was to be able to sort of go into that flow state. And we can reach. We can't just say to the brain, go to flow state. We need to find a way to go through and do that. The interior cingulate cortex appears to play a role in initiation of motivation and goal direction behaviour, cognition and motor control. Okay, just to say you couldn't do that after a certain point. Now we know you can, but it requires a lot of effort because the brain requires a lot of energy for the mass of the brain in proportion to how much energy it needs. From an organ point of view, it requires a lot of energy and effort to do it. Like when you learn a new thing, you're exhausted. You do a dissertation, so it requires effort. And the brain likes familiarity. So that's the challenge we've got. The brain likes familiarity, but we'll touch on it as we go along. So memories fade gradually. Memories are brain states from bygone time that we have to resurrect. Okay, so they're not as rich as when we first imagined. So think about it this way. Say you went away on holiday last year. If you got back the following day, you'd recall it a lot better. What you saw, what you heard, what you felt, than what you would do now. Because we've only got a finite number of neurons. Okay, our brain cells are dying every day, whether we like it or not, but we can produce new ones too. Okay, if we do activities. So using these neurons from the memories too. So what you do emotionally, you recall the memory depending on the experience. So if you broke up on a holiday 20 years ago, it was the love of your life, it might stir the emotion. You can't remember it, but the emotion still feels the same. When you see people talk about fighting in the war 50 years ago and they're in tears, the emotion, they don't recall the sensory experience really, really well. So I had a client one time, she wasn't a client, sorry, she was on a course one time, and she said to me, every time I go home, Jim, at 6 o'clock in the evening, I just feel really jittery and nervous, and I don't go out anymore after work. And I said, okay, let's sort of, I said, if you want to do a regression, we can have a look. And we did like a regression, and not that I'm not recommending regression. And it was ironic that I regressed her to a point in her life when she was 12-year-old, she got bitten by a dog. And the dog that she got bitten by had the same bark as the dog next door. Now, I'm not suggesting that was the case, but that's how her mind seemed to have coded it. So she'd go into this sort of hyper-arousal when she got in, but not struck him. And I restrained. And I read in the care plan later that her abuser would do that. Her abuser, apparently, the care staff had told me, whenever she was abused years earlier, the abuser would do that. And so the brain links things together, doesn't it? So, and we're always linking things. The brain is really implicit. So things we don't even know why. We don't know why we're anxious. We don't know why we feel down. We just kind of slip into these moods and mindsets, and so on and so forth. But the key thing for me is to be able to replace these states that are unresourceful with a more resourceful state. Okay, so that sort of state doesn't work for us, and I'll talk about that later in business. When I wrote the business book, it was on the basis that they gave me a list of KPIs, key performance indicators. I didn't know what they were 15 years ago. I said, what do you want help with? This business was sort of doing really, really badly. And they called me to come in and said, you're the man, the psych guy. And I said, I didn't want to say I didn't know what KPIs was, so I won't say I don't know what they are. I'll take them home and research them. This was before the Google days, so I couldn't even have Google. So I phoned my friend saying, what are these things? And they said, they're ways to measure performance. And I sat down and thought, okay, they want me to help the staff improve those, but they're external factors that we call external attribution. So it's a bit like in sport. You can't control the referee, you can't control the weather, you can't control, and if you pressure people to, I'm not saying you don't need them, they're like a league table. They're useful, but if you sort of pressure people, they get stressed. And then they work even worse than what they were doing before because the brain gets hijacked. Because if I can't control something, enthusiastic, motivated, focused, and on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being high, we get to 9, because 10 is probably idealistic. We get to 9, do experiential stuff, the KPIs look after themselves. Because, if you've got a market there, so I went to internal attribution, what you can control. I can come into work enthusiastic, motivated, confident. That's my choice. Things might be happening at home that aren't good, but I can still come into work with the same energy to do something good or bad. I can control that. So the goal was to give the staff a way of controlling what they could control. And that made all the difference. And that sort of was my big breakthrough in the business world. I focused more on what they could control, internal attribution. So, okay, we play a game of football, I can't control the referee, I can't control the other team, but I can go out there and apply myself and give effort, which is key. And replace that victim state. Many years ago, I had a phone call off a football manager at midnight. We were playing in a cup. I was a League 2 team, they were a Premiership team, and at midnight he phones me up saying, I can't believe it. Another player's injured. We've got the 3 players have got the flu. What team are we going to put out tomorrow? And he had a point. It wasn't great. It was our chance, but he kept moaning and the storyline, and I can't believe it. We're so unlucky. Why us? And blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, stop there. Call me in an hour. And he called me in an hour. It was like 1:30. He goes, you know what? It was today, because it had gone past midnight, is going to be the greatest day of our life. It's just, we're playing a Premiership team. The pressure's on them. We're playing the young people. It's their stage. We can enjoy it. We can have fun and really enjoy it. There's no pressure on us. They're the big team. Can you see a difference in mindset? And that can infect the players too, because if they get a manager sort of moping around, we won the game, by the way. But I'm not putting it out to that. I'm just saying that our state of empowerment is key. You know.
Yeah, I was doing a bit of study on warfare, and a battle is won or lost prior to the actual battle, with the mindset and the strategies of each side. And I think that's what you're saying too.
I think so. The mindset plays a big part. And
the strategies. And
I think so,
why get yourself in a position where you're going to guaranteed lose?
See for what it is, you know. And sometimes we do need to have and vent and just get it off our chest and have a good sulk and a moan. But then once we've done that, let's move forward. Let's spend 10% on the problem, 9% on the solution, because we don't want to get stuck. You know, life's too short to be stuck in one situation. You know, for me, we have EEGs now. We can measure brainwave activity, and that's helping us understand more hypnosis and meditation. EEGs have a good temporal understanding of what happens electrically through brainwaves. We've got technology now we didn't have before. fMRI is more spatial. You can go in deeper and see blood flow. So we've got the technology now. We can see a lot more than what we used to see years ago. So for me, the goal from a change point of view is to guide the person to go into an alpha theta state. And we talked earlier about the critical factor. The critical factor in beta, the guard of the gateway. Okay, so the conscious awake state. We want to guide people and find a way to access a more susceptible state for creative change. And if we can go to a start of alpha, and great about hypnosis and meditation, you can sort of guide people into that state which they're more susceptible to change. That belief system we can peel away at, and there's a better chance to change the person, change behavior, because the mind knows how to regulate itself. It's like our heartbeat when we fall asleep. It just carries on going. Our breathing slows down. Behavior, emotion, and we're creative when we do that. It's we're in that really creative state to make change. And when you have these moments of flow and you're in the zone, you're going to that sort of state. You can get people to go to that state, and one way you can do that by doing things you enjoy doing, visualizing, rehearsal. There are ways to do that, which we'll touch on as we go along. And we know we're more susceptible to change. What am I grateful for? To raise my energy levels up, to raise my perception of reality. And if you've got children or young people that you work with, it's a great thing to tell them, because if your default for gratitude is high, if your gratitude default is high, no matter what you experience, you're going to bounce a lot better. So you get bad news, if your default for positive emotions is higher than what it normally is, you're going to bounce better. And that's a great time to do it. In the evening, the same too. Before you go to bed, say if you watch a scary film before you go to bed, you probably have a nightmare. But in the morning and just before you go to bed, there are two gateways of the mind. Input in, input out. If you feed the mind, if you get up in the morning, the first thing you do is check your social media, you watch the news, you read the paper. Over time, it's building up in your head. Over time, won't happen straight away, but it does build up. So your morning ritual is really important. Getting up in the morning, doing gratitude lists, going for a walk, listening to motivational stuff, bit by bit, step by step. It makes a big difference, I think, anyway. And before you go to bed at night too, it's imperative too. And that's when it happens naturally anyway. Okay. So just sort of cutting a long story short, beta is when we're alert and awake. Okay. Alpha is beginning relaxation, theta is deep tranquility, and delta is deep sleep. And these days, I think we've got these monitors like these fit things that tell you a little about where we are. I don't know how accurate they are, but it gives you an idea. Also, healing too takes place in different waves of activity. healing. That's why when someone's not well, they tend to sleep a lot to heal. Animals do too, as well. So we're sort of underneath the iceberg. The iceberg, we only see 10%, and the 90% is underneath the iceberg. We want to get to that place to change. You can see sort of spectral images of meditation. Parts of the brain light up in meditation. The frontal lobe, the lobe we talked about earlier, the neocortex. People in therapy, so you can bypass the critical factor. We talked about that. We're beta, the person's awake, alert, okay. In conscious mind is in sort of full control. The alpha, the mind's relaxed, but still alert, passive awareness. Transition between conscious, subconscious. Theta, the subconscious mind is dominant, and the critical factor is bypassed. The state of tranquility, deep relaxation. We promote suggestibility. Hypnosis is more effective. So changing our beliefs, the way our beliefs impact our reality, a good place to go is in that state there. So we were aware of our beliefs, and this is where hypnosis and CBT can work really, really well, because you can do CBT and work out what distortions you have, and then you can sort of decide new ways of seeing the world. So you could use things like the ABC model and do a formulation, ABC model, the event, and you can sort of understand people's thoughts about situation and how it impacts their behavior, so on and so forth, and you can sort of elicit the way that they see the world, and you can sort of maybe go into a deeper level of trance to change it. Sorry,
can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
You know, for like, say, hypnosis, and say like me, if I'm talking about like weight, that sort of thing, is there any merit in going and working out why you're you're eating the crap stuff, you're eating too much sugar, you're eating chocolate, rather than just you're planting these, or well, not planting, but do you know what I mean, suggesting that you're having this healthy diet, blah blah blah, you're feeling really slim and good. So do you know, because I was wondering, and this is just a personal thing, like when I said I had the gastric band hypnotherapy, which would have been late 2014 sort of thing, and it was just all those positive suggestions rather than, well, addressing why you were eating the crap, say like an emotional eating.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it depends on the individual.
Yeah, so I wondered if that's why I think it wasn't so successful. If it's like, well, your arm's bleeding, you stick a plaster on, and it's temporary, rather than, well, you're not addressing why you're bleeding. You know what I mean?
No, that's a great point, and I think that each individual is different.
Yeah.
For me, every individual I work with weight reduction is based on the treatment plan, and I individualize it. So I do the iTunes, they're very generic and they're to just get out there. But if I'm seeing someone individually, it's going to be based on their reality. So many years ago, I regressed this woman, and what she would do, she'd come home from work, and she was a really high-powered businesswoman, and she'd come home from work and she'd eat all the wrong things at the wrong time. She'd broken up in a relationship a few years earlier, a marriage had broken down, and she wasn't in the relationship, and she would eat all the wrong. Was it that did the work for her? I don't know, but the important thing is she got her goal, her outcome. So it could be that some people need that sort of rationalization, but the unconscious mind being like it is, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. As long as they get meaning out of it, then that's fine by me, whether that is the real meaning behind it. Because the why is like trying to, the psychoanalysis, if we want to call it that, could be like trying to find 1p in the car park, and the mind is like an ocean. But if they get meaning out of it, then that's okay too. For me, each individual would be based on their own, and I would certainly look at food as being the key factor, because we know from energy expenditure point of view, you could run on a treadmill for 2 hours and burn the best part of a small chocolate bar. So we can sort of eliminate a chocolate bar and eat something that's got high nutritional values. It's better to do that. So I would say personally, if the person, you get some meaning out of it, if we're doing, say, a regression or something like that, then that's fine. Not that I'll regress everybody, but it would be an individual formulation. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. and certainly, do email me. I can give you some more information on some of my thoughts around that. But generally speaking, we eat for energy. The way we are, energy, but also as human beings, we eat for social. But also, I suppose in saying that too, depending on the stage of the person's life, and from the biochemical point of view, if we go deeper, perhaps someone's struggling to produce dopamine in the brain, and they need the external stimulus to produce that. So there is that too. But that's sort of going deep into biology. So if biologically, genetically, when we talk about metabolism, we can also talk about people producing chemicals in the brain. If someone doesn't produce like dopamine in the brain, they're going to crave wherever they can get it. And we know food is one way of producing it. So that's sort of throwing it out there, and I think that individualizing is the key, going forward. So I hope that sort of sheds some light on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Mindfulness, which we sort of touch on today too, which is an integral part of it. I'm going to sort of, it's not good or bad, it's letting it be, okay? And mindfulness has sort of made its way now in a big way. Is it popular in Australia now, mindfulness? Is it? I sort of come back here every year or two.
Don't you think so,
Yeah.
Arthur? Mindfulness is getting quite popular.
I think so.
Yeah. And certainly in the UK and America now, it's sort of become quite big. I've
noticed in the last couple of years, recent.
Yeah.
I noticed a lot of things on my Facebook that just that's
the algorithms for sure. And basically, it's an Eastern spiritual tradition in Buddhism. It's about being non-judgmental or critical, so just sort of letting it be, letting the thoughts go. Our sense of awareness. But you can also be mindful doing many things, just being in the moment, sitting in a room quietly, going for a walk, doing chores. It's training our attention to be consciously aware, and also mindful eating is quite useful too for people because you could eat, you go to the cinema and you sort of demolish a popcorn without realizing it. Mindful eating is quite good, so taking time to taste the food, be aware of it, chewing the food. That's a good way to sort of like, when we go to, there's all you can eat of a plate like that. We don't need that plate like that. But because we've paid the $20, $50, we've got to get our money's worth. And the key thing is sort of being more aware when we're full and leaving it too.
Are you actually saying being in the present?
Yeah, it's
being in the present, being fully aware.
Yeah, I think so. It's a good thing, and for me,
which is a hard thing to do because we're always thinking about the future.
It is indeed. It's a really
and
good point.
daydreaming about the past.
It's a really good point, and I think that from the point of view of our own well-being, see, unlike CBT, in mindfulness, you're not challenging the thoughts. You're sort of letting it be. So that can be a healthy thing. And people say, what about goals? You believe in goals. The best way to achieve your goal is being in the now.
Yeah.
But in absorption, it's quite useful because the way we... because the brain doesn't like to be told, you've got to finish this then, you've got to do that then. And the brain doesn't like excessive amounts of pressure. We do have in this modern world. We have it. And emotions are there to facilitate survival. What I would say around mindfulness is that it's useful. My concern is that it's made massive headway in society. Now everyone's sort of like saying mindfulness is great, it's the answer to all the issues out there, let's put it in schools, let's do it for different things. And for me, it's idealistic to take a 4,000-year-old principle or so and drop it in the modern world. Because some people are saying that we've got to be mindful as a way of life, and I think that's idealistic. Because in a modern world, when you get up in the morning, if you've got to go to work, you can't exactly say to your boss, I've got to be mindful now, I can't come in. And it's about adapting it and sort of being more aware, taking time to go for a walk and being there. If you sort of go for a dinner or a meal, being there with your friends, your family. If you're eating, being more mindful. So sort of adapting it and realizing that it's idealistic to be in the moment all the time. Because the mind sort of future projects on the future, like he says, that's natural, normal, and the past influences the mind too. But as much as we can do, and I would say also, It's not part of the course, but certainly one thing I would say, in people who suffered trauma, they may not, and trauma could be domestic violence, trauma could be abandonment. So all these things are traumatic to people. Whilst fighting in a war can and does produce trauma, sort of things too. So to get someone who's suffered trauma to say, okay, just be mindful, might be a bridge too far. So you might sort of do other things with them that they can work on to get to there, to get the brain functioning well again. Because parts of the brain become knocked out by trauma. They don't work as well as they used to work before. So we get them part of the brain working well again, then we can guide them to that. And trauma doesn't have to be, like I mentioned before about fighting in a war, could be domestic violence. There's, many women, or even men for that matter, in domestic violence have been suffered immensely through that, and that creates trauma as well. Also, abandonment can create trauma too. I can't remember who it was now. I was in a lecture one time. It's going to come to me. I can't remember his name now. I can't remember who it was now. I don't know. You have to do your research on this one here. I don't know for sure because I think it was in a lecture I was in one time. At a uni it may have been. It's just come to my mind then.
Keep on talking about the subject, and it'll come.
If it comes to me, I'll email you. But he was telling me that, or the class anyway, that in World War II, in the UK, in England, in World War II, you had the Blitz over London, okay? And he'd suggested that there were studies done that the children of a certain age who moved to the countryside, the wonderful English countryside, they moved away in the safety there of the countryside. They moved away from the Blitz. I think he suggested the children who moved away into the countryside had suffered more trauma being abandoned from their parents than the ones who stayed, and the Blitz continued. The fact they weren't with their parents, okay, had a big implication to their well-being than the ones who was the parents. Okay, I say that loosely, and I will investigate it for you and find out where it came from. But that's one thought to think about, that abandonment can become trauma. And it was interesting, really, when I started working in care homes in the UK in education. One thing that sort of struck me, because I brought mindfulness in for some young people to help them regulate the emotion. There was one young girl who was one of the most violent offenders in the country, and she couldn't control herself. She did 40, 50. But what really struck me when I was working with her, that I had a realization. I thought that some of these young people have never felt safe around an adult growing up. If you were to ask somebody, who did you feel safest around growing up, they're going to say mum, dad, or mum and dad, or carer. But if you've got people who have never felt safe around anyone, that's going to create a huge amount of trauma for someone. And abandonment issues, attachment issues, and mindfulness might not be the best place to start for someone who's got all this sort of stuff brewing in the periphery, which is sort of another story for another day. So emotions evolved to facilitate survival. Emotions occur in response to subjective appraisals of particular situations. So we appraise the situation, and then we have an emotional response. So example would be, at lunchtime you go for a walk, and you see your best friend, and you had a bit of a fallout last week, and your best friend ignores you. So you might think, she doesn't want to talk to me no more. We've known each other for years. And then you might send him a text saying, why did you not, who's my behaviour? You're going to live by the river, in a van. It's going to spark a feeling. If you think, I've lost a job before, I'll get another job again. It's our appraisal of the situation that affects our emotion. And that's subjective. This is subjective. This is not reality. It's your own subjectivity. Your own experiences in life are going to form your reality, and so on and so forth. And they can be automatic responses. Okay, so our bodies prepare for the situation. It's an automatic endocrine response. The feeling of relief is associated with this decrease of heart rate. So we can also use the body to affect the mind as well. Our biochemistry. We can use our physiology to affect the the mind too, because if you were to walk outside and you saw a wild dog out there, or a dog chasing you, if you're appraised, at least the dog's coming after you to eat you alive, it's going to be different if the appraisal is the dog's coming after to be patted. Now, one could be true, one might not be true, but equally we don't know what the situation is. What we react based on the reality. But the situation's automatic. The feeling of apprehension is associated with secretion of stress hormone cortisol. And Pavlovian conditioning, we avoid danger. So we talk about Pavlovian conditioning, so the Pavlov dog experiment, they ring the experiment now because it wouldn't be ethically allowed. But when I read about it, because I was writing my dissertation, they got a hammer and made a big noise, because Albert was afraid of noise. And they'll do a big bang behind him. He then associates the bang with the white rat, and then he becomes afraid of the rat and other things that are similar to the rat. So we see a operative conditioning process, that sort of implicit response forming. Then eventually through time, the likes of Cover-Jones, I think it was, who started working on what we call now desensitization. And they were doing experiments like, okay, if someone's afraid of a snake, let's start with the snake, or picture of a snake being 50 yards away from them, and we'll bring it closer and closer and closer, and the closer we bring it, the more they desensitize. And that's where we sort of got to that desensitization, and where we are, and we started using those methods for people to have exposure, and a graded exposure to the stimulus, because it's not the white rat that's dangerous, it's the association to it that's created through the loud noise. Okay, Skinner, famously talked about when one that step further, where he talked about reward. If you reward behaviour, you sort of get more of it. So ultimately, you could say if the behaviour is working and it's keeping you safe, it could be a safety behaviour, and that could be avoidance. But avoidance isn't adaptive if you want to have a functional life in the way we know functionality in the world we live in today. Because you might not go to that party because you're afraid of the consequence. But if you go, you might enjoy it. From a bonding point of view, we produce the mum produces oxytocin. In a biochemically functioning woman, she'll produce oxytocin to bond to the baby. Otherwise, there'd be no bond. The baby would be born and be like, "Who's this?" So it creates a bond for survival, and that is particularly strong in the first 2 years. It wears away. The bond doesn't wear away because the bond stays for a lifetime, but the levels of oxytocin then start to diminish as it does, and we see people who struggle in life. They don't have that nature-nurture. They don't have that nurturing in life. They can become striving. They can look for that elsewhere. We've seen famous cases of people who, being strivers, they look to get that sort of love, or what they define as love, through other forms. You read books about famous stars and you don't know what's going on underneath, and that's not saying if you become famous it's going to happen, but it shows they strive to win things, to do well, and no matter what they do, it's never enough. And they keep pushing themselves. That's not to say we shouldn't push ourselves and have goals and achieve stuff, but that's also to suggest that we leave ourselves open to vulnerability. I remember reading I don't know him personally, I don't want to speak ill about people I don't know personally, but I remember that the famous comedian, I watched a documentary of him on TV in America where he mentioned that he used to try and make his mum laugh as much as he could do to build a bond, and that's how he would become a comedian. Then he would try and make other people laugh, and no one knew, no matter what he was winning, he was winning awards and become a famous comedian, was really, really well off. And I saw one time in the documentary said that he felt alone. He talked about feeling alone, no matter how many people were around him, and the man that was suffering in silence. And I don't know the full story, I don't know him, so I don't want to comment on that, but it's an illustration of how that sort of bonding is parody.
I've seen a number of documentaries in different areas where that happens. They try really hard to impress their parents for
sure. For
that.
That's a really good point. And more often than not, the child will crave the love of one parent more than the other. That's not to say they probably love them both the same in their own way, but they'll crave one more than the other. And as a result of doing that, then in life, there's almost a projection onto the people around them. So they meet people and they have that sense of vulnerability around them. So to form attachment can be an issue. And I had a client one time in business and he had an issue where he got promoted to be a director of a big company. And it was really fascinating because he got this promotion, was good at his job, and he had a coach before me, and the coach told him he had imposter syndrome. And if you give someone a label, I'll live up to it. And I did a bit of work with him, and I regressed him, and we found out that very early on in life, he craved the attention of his mum. Very young in life, his parents had broken up, and he craved the attention of the mum. The stepdad came on the scene. But he really craved the attention. And for the mum, it was never good enough what he did. And he kept striving to sort of get her affection. And from my understanding, he had all the love and support to a point, but he kept craving it. And I said to him, there's maybe time to draw an underline now and move forward, because I said, if your mum wasn't the way she was, you wouldn't be the person you are now.
Exactly.
Very briefly, if we have a break, we saw the ABC model is quite useful as well. We'll touch on this afternoon. We get really practical stuff. It's a model that we sort of touched on, was quite useful to do to illustrate problems of functioning, look for solution, break a problem down. So very, very briefly, we're going to break. And so we talk about the activating event. We have beliefs about the event. Rational, irrational, and as a consequence we experience the emotion, the behavior, and the physiology. So you could in effect really use intervention at every angle. So the belief could be, so the situation could be breaking up a relationship, the force could be, oh no, I'll never meet anybody again, what am I going to do? Emotionally feel anxious, lost, sad, down. Behavior could be social avoidance. Physical reaction could be heart rate, could be breathing, and so on and so forth. But equally, the thought could be more neutral. It could be, well, if they didn't want to be there, maybe that's the way it is. And feeling could be more neutral. Behavior could be proactive. If they want to find a rate, they might decide they're going to change their life. Physical reaction could be more neutral. But equally, the other thought could be, great, I wish they'd gone earlier. Jump for joy, go out party. So I'm not saying one is right or wrong. I'm just saying that the models, the same applies to a job, or the same could apply to sport. A penalty shootout, a game of football. Okay, your thoughts about the game of football, the belief about the penalty shootout. I'm going to miss. What if I miss? What if it goes wrong? What if I let everybody down? Then you feel nervous and jittery. And we go behave back to type. Physically, you feel all jittery, but equally okay, you can be more neutral. Delivering some training, I used to deliver some components of CBT to care staff, and this girl that she was delivering training with me, she replaced another guy who was delivering with me, and she was going to deliver with me, and in her first, she's a really, really clever girl, really academic, really, really clever, and in her first session of delivering training, she did well. And she got about 19 good reviews out of 20. Okay, one was a bad review. It was sort of was a negative review, and she sort of focused on that review. Okay, she magnified it. She really focused on that review and didn't focus on the other 19. So she magnified it, she disqualified the positive, and we'll talk more about the labels of distorted thinking later on today, but the way she saw the situation. And then the next week we had to deliver training again, she felt really jittery. I can't do it, Jim. I didn't push her to do it. I didn't push her more than she can tolerate. I said, that's okay. we'll deal with it. She goes, I've been trying to work on it, logically, didactically. So then she sat down and let me do the training. She felt really nervous about doing it. So I sat her down afterwards. She goes, can you use some of that voodoo you do, hypnosis? I said, before I do my voodoo, let's sort of get an idea of what's going on. So I looked at her thought process, and I did some regression with her. I took her back to her life. She went back to a time in her life where she was like 12-year-old, and she got told off by the teacher for not doing her classroom homework. And she built a schema. I also gave her some other tasks to do. Visualization, rehearsal. We dealt with that. I did like a timeline technique to release the feeling. Talked about feeling, behavior. I got her to sort of do some practical work and join a speaking group. I got her to breathe more deeper, to calm the sympathetic nervous system now, parasympathetic. Before she went on to speak, I say breathe deeper to calm the sympathetic now. With the parasympathetic, relax the speech, the muscles. So I got her to do some stuff, and we worked on the thoughts in a suggestive way. But we used this to understand what thoughts were going through her mind, and we altered the perception of reality. Different appraisal, different outcome. And she was delivering, and she'd gone on to deliver and do well. So didactic is quite useful, but didactic will take you so far. I think that being experiential can be quite useful too, as well. That sort of shows the model is quite useful in that respect. Very briefly before we break, we have these schemas. I talked about schemas. I'm going to briefly talk about schemas. Schemas being associations, so fire, hot. If I put my hand in fire, I'm going to think hot, and I won't put it back there again or start. We build association. So for example, let's say a kitchen schema. If I mention the word kitchen, what would you expect to find in the kitchen? Cooker. Yeah, a cooker. What would you see and hear and feel? You might smell some food, because that's your experience. If I ask someone from some, I don't know, someone in a tribe in the Amazon who'd never seen a kitchen in their life, they'd have no schema. Equally, if we went to their environment and they gave us a word for what they describe, a domestic aspect of the environment, we would know. So we use our experiences in the past to build these schemas, but that's our reality. Okay, so a bit like at lunchtime, you go out for a walk, and we all go out for a walk, and one of us has a dog like that had a dog like that as a 5-year-old, and the dog was really loving and great, and one of us got attacked by a dog like that as a 5-year-old. The point being is that it's our own reality. And we have about 60,000 thoughts a day, so they say. Most of them are useful, the generalizations we make. We generalize, so we don't have to relearn to drive again, have to relearn to do many things again. So we might have to buy the milk or stop by or whatever. But we do have these repeat offenders. And they're the ones that we're going to look at that can make a big impact on our life. It's these repeat offenders in our mind that we begin to believe that form our reality, and we're sort of going to talk after our break about cognitive distortions, which was created by Aaron Beck, who was considered to be the father of CBT. It was popularized by David Burns as well, and they talked about these automatic thoughts, which I mentioned earlier. Like, there's some of the categories, 10 popular ones, for example, all or nothing, overgeneralization, mental filter, and so on and so forth. Okay. And that can have a big impact on our reality. But we can sort of alter our way of thinking through doing things like, we don't have to do hypnosis to alter the way of thinking. There are other ways that people use to do that. But for me, hypnosis is one of the most effective ways of restructuring our thoughts. And they generally are centered around ourselves, the world, and the future, from the point of view of helplessness, and our outlook. And we're going to touch on hypnotic qualities after the break, how we can sort of alter our reality. And I'm going to use some techniques you can use that are quite useful to be more self-aware of our thoughts, be able to